Hello, welcome to another episode of So Fly. It is middle of June here. Actually, this podcast comes out June 15th. It's June 14th, so it's hot off the presses. Love a good fresh show for y'all. Super excited to be recording today. Of course, got myself, Mitch. We've got Aldo.
Hey, everybody.
And Yilma is at the Cure?
At a Cure concert.
At a Cure concert. Yeah. So he's gone to see the Cure in Toronto. And there we go. Hopefully he's having a ball. But yeah, super excited to be recording a show here today. Captains for Clean Water is a grassroots nonprofit organization that fights to restore and protect our water resources. In 2016, it began as a couple of fishing guides that had had enough of Florida's poor water management practices, devastating the estuaries they rely on. These guides were convinced that if everyone knew about these issues, they would have been fixed long ago. The solution is known, but has been delayed for decades due to lack of political will and public awareness. So, Captains for Clean Water set out to change that. Of course, they work to advance science-based solutions through efforts focused on awareness and education, empowering people like you to speak up for our water quality and hold elected officials accountable. Since their inception, they've united the outdoor industry, environmental groups, business communities, concerned citizens, and gotten everyone rallying around these important issues. And they're seeing more people than ever get involved in the fight for clean water, which is incredible. Of course, there's no shortage of hard work there, which we'll talk about. As a result, progress is happening at a record pace, but there is, of course, still a long way to go. So today, Captain Chris Wittman is a fourth-generation Florida native and co-founder of Captains for Clean Water. He witnessed the consequences of Florida's water mismanagement and recognized he had to do something. His extensive experience as a fishing and hunting guide, nationally renowned tournament angler, and on-camera TV host and show producer allows him to engage leading brands and personalities across the industry and identify opportunities to expand the organization's reach. But today, he's on the show. Chris, welcome. Did I pronounce your last name right?
Wittman, yes, sir. Thank you.
Oh, excellent. Yes, of course. Yeah, super excited to have you. It's one of our longest intros. I was kind of starting to trip over my own words at the end there, but that's because there's just so much to talk about here. But yeah. First of all, how's it going and where are you calling in from?
It's going great. I'm in Southwest Florida, Fort Myers area. Many people may know we just got hit by Hurricane Ian the end of last year.
Right.
Kind of devastated our hometown where our headquarters is, but we are all good and on the rebound and on the road to recovery here.
Okay, well that's good news. And are you fishing at all lately? What's the status on that right now?
Yeah, I haven't been fishing too much myself, unfortunately. A lot of time in the office and on the road.
Yeah.
But the fishing has been pretty decent. We're in the middle of our tarpon season now, which is fishing guides. That's always your bread and butter. So it's good. The water quality's fairly good for this time of year, and the fishing is going great. So
radical.
Right on.
That's good to hear.
It's crazy that are you guiding as much as, it seems like, I guess we'll get all into this, but with all the advocacy you're doing, do you even have time to guide?
No, I have not, have not been able to guide since 2017.
Wow.
Basically had to walk away from our careers to run this full time.
Right.
Yeah, we're definitely going to get more into captains and stuff. It's a huge organization. It's from the outside, it's a big organization. Obviously, we've seen the work that Captains has been doing for years, and even before we met you, or of course we met Benny Blanco, got to fish with him in February, March, something like that, and so it's amazing what you guys are doing. And of course, we're going to talk more about that. But maybe before we get into Captains for Clean Water and all the amazing work you guys are doing, let's just hear a bit more about yourself and how you got into fishing, how you got into fly fishing, when you became a captain, all that kind of stuff.
Sure. I grew up on an island called Sanibel here out on the coast. So,
oh, cool.
Fishing has pretty much, been part of my life as long as I can remember it. I don't remember the first time I went fishing. I've seen pictures of it, but I've been fishing as long as I can remember with my dad and my family, and so I guess as a kid you live on an island, you grow up on an island, whether you're fishing or surfing or scuba diving, one way or another, your life literally revolves around the water, and it's part of you, and so. Yeah. My family's profession was general contractors, doing kind of small construction company, doing high-end residential homes and small commercial jobs. And I did that for a while through high school, in the summers and on weekends and off time. And for me, anytime that I would be, on a construction site, I'd be looking out at the water, wishing I was out there. And so, um, late I guess it was 1999, I decided that, I was going to make a leap away from the family business
Yeah.
and become a fishing guide so that I could selfishly spend more time on the water and also get to share, what I loved about Florida with other people and make a living doing it. And it was a great career for me. Guided, full time since 2000, and that led to professional tournament fishing for ESPN and the National Redfish Tour around the country. Led to numerous outdoor programs, and ultimately producing and hosting an outdoor program with Discovery's Destination America in 2015-16. And
That's sick.
so yeah.
What show was that? What show would you guys
It's called
do?
Wild Instinct Outdoors.
Ah, cool. Gotta check that out. Is it still out there for someone to find?
Fortunately, I don't think we got that in Canada. Sorry.
It's,
I've got my tricks.
it's out there. I think nowadays, once you put stuff on the internet, it's there forever.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah. That's awesome. Okay, well, that's something I gotta check out. That's cool. I mean, that's a whole thing we could talk about in a minute. But okay, so you kind of grew up fishing, grew around water, became part of your identity, as it does with many people. And then was it fly fishing you started like right off the bat, or did fly fishing kind of come in later?
No, I mean, I literally started fishing when I was, I don't know, a couple years old.
Right.
I do remember, the first time I got a saltwater fly set up. I wasn't old enough to drive, so I was probably maybe like 10, maybe 12 years old, 13 years old, somewhere around in there. And I got a St. Croix. It was a 5-6 weight. So
nice.
Today I'm kind of like, is it a 5 or is it a 6? And,
Yeah.
I remember those split weights. Those are weird.
Yeah, but a little 5-6 weight with a Orvis bat and kill reel on it, and
nice.
And I had no clue. I would watch Flip Palette and whatnot on Saturdays and Sundays, and no clue. But actually, it was funny because I actually took a workshop vise, not a fly vise, like a straight up workshop vise, and like a live bait hook, and spun some chicken feathers and like some craft eyes, like not even fly tying material, into something that I thought looked like a pilchard. And I went out to Fort Myers Beach and caught like a 38-inch snook on this thing.
Got a fish on it.
6 weight. Yeah.
Damn, that's sick.
Yeah.
On a 6 weight.
38-inch snook.
Holy smokes.
It was wild. And I was clueless at the time. I'm a kid back then, and I killed it. And I took it home and ate it. And I'm like, I look back at that today, I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah, I know. The stuff we do, we have no idea when we're kids. Like, I did the same thing. Like when I learned to fly tie, I took a vice, and just tied a bunch of thread on a jig. And I was like, this doesn't look like a fly. What am I doing wrong here? But I didn't catch shit on that. So nicely done.
So, I think anybody fishing or hunting or whatever, I think there's a natural progression as you excel in your craft in certain areas. You want to take on more challenging aspects and challenge yourself and your skills. And that's the same, no different than with many people. It's the same thing happened with me. And I got to the point where if I was going fishing for fun or for myself, it was most enjoyable for me to have the challenge of fly fishing versus going fishing with live bait or
totally
lures or whatever.
So then the foray into guiding, you left the business in '99 and then got into guiding. How did you find those? That transition. Like, was it pretty quick? Was there lots of work right away, or
Yeah, it was very quick. Our region here, Southwest Florida, Fort Myers, Sanibel, it's a tourist-driven economy,
right?
Right.
And so between our tourist season and when I started, I was willing to take people, 4 or 5 people on my boat and go like family fun fishing or even sight fishing, or sightseeing out to the islands just to get business. But very quickly I was able to get to strictly, pretty hardcore fishing charters. And between that and being multi-generational from this area, I had a lot of, people that I knew that hired me that were locals during the off season. So yeah, it was, it was a pretty quick turn up to being full time in a pretty busy career.
That's amazing. So what was the point in your career where you just said, I got to start some kind of organization to fight what's happening to our waters? How did Captains start?
It really didn't start with saying like we needed to start an organization.
Right.
We, throughout my whole life, even prior to my career, we knew we had water issues. Every couple years, we would experience massive discharges from Lake Okeechobee in the wet season usually, and it would decimate our fishery around Sanibel Island where I grew up. It would be such a large volume of water that it would actually turn that saltwater fishery fresh.
Wow.
Wow.
You'd have a huge plume of fresh water that would kind of envelop the island and would push out offshore several miles. There's aerial pictures of that on our website from 2018 and 2016. So we're aware of these issues. I don't think it wasn't until 2016. I had been gone for several months filming my TV show.
Yep.
And I came back and I was reaching out to some of my fishing guide buddies down in Florida Bay about filming some shows for the next season. And they were all up in arms, people like Benny Blanco, about this massive seagrass die-off that happened over the summer prior while I was gone. And it was like 40 to 50,000 acres of seagrass that died almost overnight.
Jeez.
And so for me, that's more seagrass than we have in all of my fishery, all of Pine Island Sound.
Right.
Wow.
And so I heard about that, and it was hypersaline. It got too salty because of the lack of fresh water.
Yeah.
And that no longer could flow down to Florida Bay to the Keys and the Everglades. And so consequently, I get home and it's February and should be kind of at the end of our dry season. And we had kind of a very wet dry season, and we're getting these massive discharges that we are familiar with seeing in the summer months, but all of a sudden we're getting them in the end of February and March, leading right into our tourist season. And it was like collapsing our fishery. You couldn't have live bait anywhere in that area without it dying. I mean, it was basically the saltwater fishery was fresh, and it started having the same effect. And it goes for months on end. So the initial thing was, you get all the shellfish, the crabs, the stuff that can move, starting to crawl up on the beaches to get away from the fresh water and die.
Wow.
And so you've got, conch shells and crabs and stuff by the tens of thousands crawling up onto your beaches, dying. Obviously not real good for beach tourism. And so a lot of our clients were calling and saying, hey, we're going home early. My wife and kids want to hang out on the beach while I was going to fish for a few days, and there's dead fish everywhere, dead shells everywhere. We're going home early. And then, we'd have to, instead of fishing the area around Sanibel, we'd have to run, 20 miles to get away from that water. So it was just kind of a real wake up call that, look, the very same water that was destroying our fishery was the same water that was needed to stop those hypersaline conditions down in Florida Bay and in Benny's fishery. And it was like this one big problem that was connected, even though we were, several hours, hundreds of miles apart. And at that point in time, it wasn't like, look, let's start an organization. It was, something has to change. This isn't sustainable. We can't go down this road every couple of years. And so we started looking for somewhere to plug in as fishing guides that we felt would represent our interest, and we felt they would have a focus on to us what was the biggest thing that impacted our businesses and our way of life. There was other organizations that, that were around the fishing community that we were supportive of, but they weren't focusing on, to us, the thing that was having the greatest impact on our way of life and on our fishery, which was these massive discharges from the lake, and was the lack of water going to the Everglades. Ultimately, it was Everglades restoration. And so we looked for somewhere to plug in, somewhere for us to try to use our voice, because you look at it and go, we're fishing guides with these, multi-decade careers, and we're not involved. And the reason we weren't involved was there just wasn't anywhere that we saw that our voice, our effort could make a difference in changing this. And so we started diving into that, looking into it. A fellow fishing guide, Daniel Andrews, who's the other founder of the organization, called me. He's several years younger than me, and I think he was probably in his maybe his fourth or fifth year guiding full time. And somewhat similar to me, I walked away from my family business that was established. He walked away from a full ride scholarship in college to pursue his dream job as a fishing guide. Yeah. And I think he called me because, I was one of the more senior guides around here at the time. And he called me basically thinking hey, I think I might have screwed up. Maybe I should have stayed in college. What's happening? And so him and I started looking for ways that we can make a difference. We went to Tallahassee. We thought, policymakers, if they know what's happening to our community, they represent us, they'll do something about it. Right. We were met with double talk and political bullshit, which, we're fishermen, we identify BS pretty easily. So
the BS meter is strong.
Yeah. So we came back from that and really realized that surprisingly there was a solution that could have a significant impact on this. I wouldn't say it would completely fix our problems, but it has the ability to fix the lion's share, these crippling events every 2 or 3 years. And it was a solution that would help us. It would help the East Coast, who just the year prior had massive algae blooms over in the St. Lucie River. And it would help Florida Bay and the Keys. And that solution's Everglades restoration. And the reason for these problems was the altering of the Everglades.
That's what I was going to ask. You saw this change in the ecosystem. Everything was out of whack, dying off seagrass, too salty water,
not enough salty water.
Not enough salty water. And it was what was the cause? And that's what it is.
It's imbalance. It's imbalance in a system. You had an ecosystem that historically water would flow from south of Orlando down through the center of the state into Lake Okeechobee. It would fill up Lake Okeechobee. It would overflow its southern rim and would feed what we call the River of Grass. About 80-mile wide flowing grass river, a couple feet deep with sawgrass. And that would flow its way south through the interior of the Everglades, between basically Miami and Naples, and all the way down to Florida Bay and empty out through all those hundreds of creeks and rivers into the Gulf and into Florida Bay. And that's what would balance salinity levels down there. That's what would hydrate the Everglades. So back around the early 1900s, mankind's mindset was conquer nature and turn worthless land into something prosperous. And Florida was no different. There was first attempts by private entities to drain the Everglades, to turn it into...
Can you imagine
something
that meeting where they're just sitting around a table, profits are up, let's drain the glades. It's
you had the very, very beginning of development and tourism down here. You had efforts to have I guess US based food crops.
Right.
And you had what they saw as a worthless swamp. And so Yeah, I mean, the old historic pictures and stuff of these, steam driven dredges and guys with, wagons and dynamite and stuff trying to, the way that you drain the Everglades is you dig canals to bleed the water off the landscape and
Right.
drain it off of that river of grass
Into the ocean, like eventually into the ocean, I guess. Yeah.
Yep, primarily into the Atlantic on the East Coast. And so there was all these attempts, and then with each attempt there was these catastrophic failures. You can't, Mother Nature isn't, easily tamed. You've seen it out west where people would, attempt in the early times like that to go in and build a dam, and then the dam
Right.
would not hold and it would breach and it would flood the town and kill a bunch of people. This was no different. There was some big hurricanes. 1929, there was a hurricane and it flooded some of those communities that they had drained the land to grow. They're growing primarily sugarcane. There was, so tons of people died. So then the government got involved and they came in and ultimately created the system that we have today. And so they created a series of canals that would go kind of northwest to southeast across the state, draining the water out to the Atlantic. Excuse me.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
You're fine.
And they would put up a series of levees. The Tamiami Trail, which is Highway US 41, which connects Miami to Fort Myers and Naples, was put in. That acted as a dam. It acted as a barrier of flow from water flowing from the north down into Florida Bay.
Yep.
Sorry.
No problem at all. No problem at all.
And then ultimately, that system just couldn't handle the volume of water in a wet year coming out of Lake Okeechobee. So they connected Lake Okeechobee to the St. Lucie River on the East Coast.
Yeah.
And then they literally dug a connection there. And then they dug a connection connecting Lake Okeechobee to the Caloosahatchee River on the West Coast where I grew up.
Yeah.
And those were the big relief valves. So now when they got a bunch of water in the lake, they straightened
Kind of
our river, took out all the oxbows and made it into a canal. And now you could shunt water out of that system much faster than you historically could. That's the system we were left with. And at the time they thought it worked great, but what it did was it created a total imbalance in the ecosystem. On the East Coast and the West Coast, the interior of the Everglades began to dry up. You saw changes in the actual plants, and the tree islands that were normally very elongated from that water flow started to grow rounder in shape. And we started throughout time seeing symptoms of that change and symptoms of that imbalance, like the seagrass die off, like these algae blooms.
Okay.
And then even to the point that the Biscayne Aquifer, which is the drinking water aquifer that supplies drinking water to all of Miami and Dade. So, over almost probably about 10 million people rely on this aquifer for drinking water. It sits underneath the Everglades and relies on that flow of water over top of it to percolate down through the limestone and replenish that aquifer. They started pulling salt water because there was not enough water flowing and filling that aquifer. So you had intrusion from the Atlantic Ocean. And so they had to move their pump stations inland. So there was all these signs that we screwed up this system that was one interconnected system.
Yeah.
A lot of really smart people before this was even, before I was even around, realized this is a problem, and they came up with a way to fix it. And that solution, we got together with a bunch of scientists, a bunch of ecologists, engineers, and they came up with what is the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan, or CERP is the acronym. And it's the largest restoration project of its kind ever undertaken anywhere on the planet. So it's a massive restoration project. And it essentially reconnects the system that was fragmented and broken into segments, reconnects that conveyance of water. It fills in some of those canals. removes some of those barriers to flow, adds bridges along Tamiami Trail. And the big components of it were the most politically challenging were some massive reservoirs and filter marshes south of Lake Okeechobee in the industrial sugar industry kind of footprint, what's called the EAA, the Everglades Agricultural Area. And this massive reservoir would take Lake Okeechobee's polluted water, and instead of discharging it to the coast, would be able to put it into this reservoir, filter it through a man-made wetland, and then deliver it to the Everglades in the dry season when it was needed. That plan, that SERP plan, was a bipartisan effort. Jeb Bush was the governor and Bill Clinton was the president, and they signed that into law in the year 2000. So the year that I started guiding.
Okay.
Wow.
It was thought that it would take 30 years to complete those 68 infrastructure projects within that plan. So here we go to 2016 with this collapse happening, and we're over halfway through the projected time frame of that suite of projects, and not a single project had been completed. And that was when we started learning that, we started putting the pieces of the puzzle together, that the reason this wasn't happening was you had insignificant funding year after year after year. You're talking about billions of dollars, to do these massive projects. And the reason there wasn't funding was there was a lack of political will. The industrial sugar industry wants the system to stay the way that it is because it works perfectly for them. Lake Okeechobee is treated as a reservoir, not a natural lake.
Right.
What do you want a reservoir? You want it to be full, right? If it's so they would advocate for that lake to be as full as possible at all times. What that meant for us was if you hold it artificially full during the dry season, when the summer rains come, there's no capacity and you got to dump it out the relief valves, which is where I live. So they're one of the biggest political lobbies in the state of Florida. It's a consolidated industry. It's basically two big companies. So it's real easy for them to get on the same page and go influence the political system. The stakeholders and people like myself, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of people with individual voices and jobs, much harder to have a consolidated voice.
And especially if you're trying to guide. And feed your families and stuff.
Guides, you're talking about, in 2018, we had another crisis. 80 to 90% of our tourism hospitality industry on the islands were vacant. Hotels were vacant. Restaurants were empty. We literally had soup kitchen nonprofits out on our barrier islands providing groceries to people who worked as servers and bartenders and stuff because they had no business. They couldn't feed their families. It literally can collapse our economy on top of affecting our way of life. But so it wasn't, to get back to your question, it's kind of a long-winded way to get there, but
no, it's great. That's gave us a full overview of the history of the problem.
That's Everglades restoration. And that's why it's our focus. So we weren't like, let's start an organization. We started to try to find an organization to plug into. An organization that it didn't exist, and when we got pushed back by ones that were like, that's too controversial and it'll never change. It's just been like that. And so we are fishermen. So not only do we identify BS, but we're also pretty stubborn and hard headed. And so, that we didn't get answers that we liked. And so we figured, at this point, we just need to see if anybody else cares, if we can get other people like ourselves to try to do something. And we were so naive in the system back then. I think we wrote a letter to the mayor of Fort Myers, like the mayor could do anything about this, but we just wanted to do something. And so we created a Facebook page after, we don't have any business, right? Like everybody's going home because of our water issues. So we're talking to other guides. We're talking to people at restaurants, bartenders. And everybody was like, yeah, it's terrible, it's terrible, it's terrible. And you'd hear all these different reasons why and whatnot. And so we created a Facebook page, Captains for Clean Water. And we just thought, like, look, we're captains. We just want something that isn't too outrageous to ask for. We want clean water. And we asked some of our friends at Bass Pro Shops if we could borrow their meeting room upstairs and see if there was anybody that would, felt the same way we did. And we put a post out, I think on a Friday or something, saying we're going to have a meeting at Bass Pro Shops on Wednesday. Everybody's welcome. I think we're kind of hoping like maybe a few people, dozen people or so would show up. Well, in the interim, between when we put that post up and there was all these news stories coming out about dead fish everywhere, discharges from Lake Okeechobee. Yeah. And one of the things that the sugar industry historically did and relied on was control the narrative. No different than any special interest. You can use propaganda or talking points to, sow confusion, sow doubt, divide fear. Communities, try to say, the West Coast is getting this because the East Coast, has all the money, or tell the East Coast is getting it because the West, the East Coast fighting the West Coast instead of fighting together. And so like the day before that meeting we were going to hold, might have even been the day of, all of a sudden we get wind of, I got off the water and we get wind of a press conference being held by U.S. Sugar downtown Fort Myers. And
at that Bass Pro Shops.
I thought, well, that's crazy. Like, why is a company based 90 miles from here in Clewiston holding a press conference here? Yeah. And so we went there and we tried to get in. And when I pulled up, Daniel and a couple other fishing guide buddies had already tried to get in. It was closed door, press only, hand selected, no public, in a hotel meeting room there. And so I actually remembered that I had a press credential card from like the Shooting Sports Association or something from my TV show.
Because of the TV show. Right.
And so
that's awesome.
I'm literally in like board shorts and a hoodie. And I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to try to get in. And so I go up to she's just a girl running the door. And I'm like, no, I'm press. Here's my credentials right here. Here's my name on the card. Here's my ID. And she let me in. And I got in the room, and it was a big, small room.
Whoa.
A couple of the local news anchors that
infiltrated,
interviewed me as a fishing guide about the water issues and stuff. So they saw me come in and were kind of like, huh. And it was just all this like one-sided presentations and talking points. Like, oh, well, 98% of the water comes from the north. The problem is north of the lake, not us to the south. And it's like, well, yeah, that's where the water historically came from. The problem is it can no longer go south. It's like water from your bathtub comes from the shower head. If you're not letting it drain and your bathtub's overflowing, the answer is not to,
the shower head.
Stop taking showers. The answer is to open the drain back up.
Right. Yeah.
And so it was just kind of like, it was just this one-sided cherry-picked information. And I started asking a couple questions that made it pretty clear that it was one-sided cherry-picked. And they shut down the press conference, kicked everybody out, came over, wanted my ID, wanted to know who I was. Like,
no way.
Yeah. And so we went outside and proceeded to interview with the news stations that just got kicked out. They just shut down the press conference. So we went from that to this meeting at Bass Pro Shops, and where we hoped, maybe some of our fishing guide buddies would show up. And we got there, and there was like over 300 people.
Wow.
Piled out the door, every news station.
Yeah.
There was people that were commercial fishermen. There was recreational retired fishermen, people who don't typically get along,
Yeah, for sure.
Just because of conflicting uses on the resource. And there was fishing guides, there was rec guys, there was I mean, you name it. Jet ski rental people, people from the hospitality industry, realtors. But what it was all these people from all these different stakeholder groups in our community that were affected, that were impacted, and wanted to see something change, but like Daniel and I, didn't have a path to plug in, didn't have somewhere to plug in. And so I think that's when the light bulb went off for Daniel and I, that we have an opportunity here. We have a desire. This desire is being fueled because we're in a time of a water crisis. Is that passion by all these people in this community able to sustain when we are no longer in this water crisis? Once the waters get good next year and we have a year or two of good water,
right?
Does everybody get complacent and go back to
and
normal?
Forget the long run?
Oh, problem fixed.
Forget the long game.
Just out of sight, out of mind. And that's historically what would happen, and that was the approach that was taken. And so we thought that if we could educate people, stakeholders, if we could educate policymakers on all these different people it was impacting, if we could give them a way to use their voice to advocate for themselves, that certainly we would have to see some improvement. And so from like 2016 to end of 2017, we started doing that. We were still guiding, but we were, every waking minute, we were advocating about this. We were trying to meet with people. We were trying to get more people involved. And in the beginning, there was pushback. There was pushback from some of our friends and fellow guides saying, don't talk about water issues. It's going to hurt our business.
Scare people, right?
Short-term kind of thinking. It was like, well, man, it might hurt your business right now, but if the fishery collapses,
what kind of business?
There is no business.
And so it just was kind of like an organic movement that people did want to stay in it. That it was the most important thing that affected them. And going into 2018, we had another water crisis. And it just so happened that that kind of was for us, the straw that broke the camel's back was that 2016. For a lot of the people who were on the fence, who had been hearing from us, that 2018, when it happened again.
Oh, that was like the kind of like the big red tide that happened. Right. Yeah. Because we even, like, I would say, like, we have a national broadcaster here called the CBC, and know even they were picking it up as a environment.
Yes,
definitely that. Yeah, exactly. It was getting around.
We had red tide present, and the thing with the water that comes from Lake Okeechobee, just the volume of water, even if it was drinkable water, just the volume turns the fishery so fresh that's what kills the seagrass and the oysters. It's just salinity drop. It's like you take a saltwater aquarium and make it fresh; it can't live. But with it comes massive amounts of legacy pollution from primarily industrial agriculture. So synthetic fertilizers, nitrogen and phosphorus. And when you talk about a red tide bloom, that's an organism that can feed off of those nutrients. And so 2018, we had a red tide bloom present when we got these massive discharges.
Right.
And it made everything historically, water quality issues, look like child's play. We had dolphins dying by the dozens. We had sea turtles, manatees. We had a 27-foot whale shark die and wash up on the beach behind my friend's resort on Sanibel. It was so big that they had to dig a hole in the beach and bury it. It was a massive whale shark.
Jeez. That's like a blast.
It was full ecosystem collapse.
Wow.
And so, the community was up in arms. And the Army Corps of Engineers, who controls the management of the water, along with the South Florida Water Management District, decided to have a town hall meeting here. And it was like pitchforks and it was bad.
People were pissed.
And so they showed up and they were holding a meeting at the yacht club in Cape Coral. And as all the press and people are there, there's a dead manatee pup hanging on, or a live manatee pup hanging onto its dead mother in the boat ramp.
Jeez.
And
Oh my
FWC's
God.
trying to haul the deceased mother out, and the manatee pup's, clinging onto its tail. So
Oh
my
God, that's so heartbreaking.
it went national. Like you said, it caught national news. We were doing, that point we were a couple years in, so our name was out there. Where it's like if reporters start calling, they're like, "Oh, you should call these guys."
Right.
And so, I mean, we started doing interviews with, on a national level, CBS Nightly News out of New York, Anderson Cooper, big national news outlets, and it started to get a ton of attention. So it just kind of snowballed into this explosive movement. And because of what was happening with the water crisis and the opportunity, that's when we really looked at it and said, okay, like, if there is an opportunity to impact change here, but if we are, it's going to take the same amount of dedication and effort that we had given to our fishing careers.
Yeah.
We can't do this kind of half-ass part-time. There's a movement happening, but it has to be organized. And so that's when we kind of created an organization to organize and steer the movement that was happening all across the state of Florida.
That's wild. I mean, it's a lot to think about and take in. I mean, one of the cool things like I'm taking away from it is just like how connected Florida is such a good case in a way as an example of how connected ecosystems are. And when you do something in the north, here's how it affects the South, and industries are more connected than we think. And, people are starting to realize this, I guess, over the last 15 years. Only now we're starting to really see actual stuff maybe happen to help, keep everything working in order. But, yeah, it's just amazing how everything's so connected, like Okeechobee to the Everglades to the South, the East, the West. Yeah, it's wild.
We were lucky enough in February to, go to the Everglades, and I know I had driven through it a couple times going to the Keys or whatever, but so that's not really actually going to the Everglades. We were lucky enough to be hosted by Benny, and Mitchie and I went there, and like, I mean, is there more, aside from the Grand Canyon or maybe Yosemite, is there a more iconic American wilderness? Like, I don't know.
Exactly.
Like,
yeah.
And on top of that, how unique is it that it's in a tropical setting kind of thing look at America?
Right.
So look at the Everglades, like in the early 1900s, and be like, okay, we got to plow this and put a factory on it. Like, okay, I can almost like excuse that because people back then, like, people that came before us, they were out of their minds. But now, the people alive now, to look at the Everglades and say, we just got to pump money out of this thing, like, how evil are you? Like, what's wrong with you?
It feels like you're in like a Disney movie,
Yeah,
sometimes.
I mean, how much money do you need? I mean, Jesus.
I don't know. I don't know.
When is enough? Yeah,
it's crazy.
It's interesting because you're right. I mean, the Everglades is such a national or international treasure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think as Floridians, we somewhat in the past took that for granted because it was right here. It was our backyard. It was just kind of like,
and what a backyard.
Florida. It was just Florida. It wasn't like, hey, let's go to the Everglades for the weekend. It was like, let's go to the woods. It was like, let's go to camp.
Yeah.
But looking at it now through the lens I have now, it's like, I think about the things that society around the world engages on. And you think about a few years back when the Amazon rainforest was on fire, right?
Yeah.
There was people around the world calling attention to that issue, and that was a significant issue.
Mm-hmm.
How many of those people do you think have ever been or will ever go to the Amazon rainforest?
Yeah, probably
exactly.
Never.
Right,
Yeah.
none of them.
Yeah.
But here you have something of equal intrinsic value, like the Everglades, that's literally dying under our noses. But because it's not this visual fire, people weren't involved until we started having collapse.
The red
visual.
Tides,
and then people started to recognize it. And then, the connectivity of the system, the ecosystem is one thing. Think about the connectivity of the economy. think about the boat manufacturers and engine manufacturers that are based in, Michigan that sell their product here. You think about like, Yeti coolers in Austin, Texas, Orvis, Sims, Columbia.
You said like the hospitality industry, like
clothing companies,
tourism,
gear companies,
everything. It's all connected by water.
Spend thousands of dollars on gear just to go surfing once,
right? So you have all these companies based all over the country that have an invested interest in Florida's water quality, and that was the other piece that we were able to plug in was here's the stakeholder voice, and something I think unique about Everglades Restoration is it's a partnership, a 50-50 partnership between the state of Florida and the federal government, requiring equal funding from both sides. So you have to get hundreds of millions of dollars every year from both the state and the federal government.
Right.
The state's one thing if you get them bought in, but the federal government, you've got 49 other states who are fighting for that same bucket of money for things that they need. And so it's very critically important that other states support sending hundreds of millions of dollars to Florida to restore the Everglades. One, because it's the right thing to do. It's a national treasure. But two, because it does. You can use a language that I think policymakers understand a little more than what's right or wrong, and that is, economic value in drivers. Yeah. And so that's something that I think the outdoor industry has brought to this conversation and this effort since Captains for Clean Water, and we've been able to get companies from all over the world to plug in and support Everglades restoration year after year.
It's amazing. I mean, just thinking about where Captains is at now and the future, I think it's one thing to be optimistic. It's another thing to be a person like you who just decides that you got to do something. Are you hopeful for where Captains is going, and also SERP, and just generally, do you see a positive stuff happen?
I mean, one thing that was kind of cool, Mitch, I don't know if you remember, but Benny was like, tomorrow I've got to go to this. When the Army Corps was breaking ground at the EAA reservoir, he's like, I got to go see Chris tomorrow. We're breaking ground. So it was cool. It felt, so often, I guess why I'm bringing this up is and to your point, Mitch, or question, I should say. Yeah. So often it feels like it's the David and Goliath thing, and Goliath is winning. But it kind of felt like, obviously the fight's long. It'll probably be the rest of our lifetimes, But it felt like, to me, kind of positive.
Something positive, right?
Positive things were happening.
A big thing, actionable things.
Yeah. I would say when we started, we were just fueled by anger. I wouldn't say there was much optimism involved. Now, 7+ years in, we're extremely optimistic. We've seen more progress made and projects broken ground or completed in the last 6 years than we did in the 16 prior.
Right. Cool.
The biggest, most politically challenging project of all is the heart of Everglades restoration. It's that EAA reservoir that Aldo was talking about. When that bill was filed for that reservoir, it was actually in 2017. We were told that it would never happen. It would not happen. First, we were told that bill wouldn't pass. It was called Senate Bill 10. And we rallied the outdoor community, and because we were on the heels of a water crisis, it did pass. It passed veto-proof. So the governor at the time, Rick Scott, it passed with such a high margin that it was veto-proof. And so it passed, but then it was said, well, it will never happen. It will never get funded consistently. And ever since, there's been attack after attack after attack, attempt after attempt to defund that, to stall it, to delay it, whether it's lawsuits, whether it's, making that money available for other stuff, whether it's renewing leases on the lands, all these different things. And we've been able to persevere and overcome those hurdles because we've been able to keep the public involved and keep them aware of what's going on, and then get them to use their voice. And so to see you know, earlier last year, that project actually breaking ground was significant. It was something that we told was impossible. And so, yeah, I think more optimistic than ever before, but also very realistic in the fact that we've been here before. In the year 2000, when SERP was signed into law, people popped champagne bottles and thought we were going to finally save the Everglades.
Right.
16 years later, there wasn't much getting done. And so we know from past experience that we cannot get complacent. The public, the people, cannot let their foot off the gas. The attempts to stall this and to derail it and to defund it, these massive projects that will take, like you said, years, decades, are going to happen time after time after time. And the only way that we beat that, the only way that David beats Goliath in that is by David, standing together and remaining very vigilant and getting louder and getting bigger and growing that voice and that army. And so that's what our job is at Captains for Clean Water. It's like a lot of people will ask, like, okay, so how do you say you're an education organization, right? So you don't endorse candidates, you don't condone candidates, you don't get involved politically, you don't have lobbyists. It's like, look, the sugar industry has the largest lobbying team of multiple firms, over 70 lobbyists in the state of Florida. So even if I could hire one lobbyist,
yeah,
what am I going to do?
They'd quit pretty fast.
70 lobbyists that are pumping, $10 to $15 million in election cycle into the political system. So you can't combat it like that. So the way that we're able to turn, education into that is basically, we looked at ourselves and why weren't we involved? We didn't understand maybe what needed to be done or what the problem was. We did not see an outlet for us to use our voice. We didn't think that an individual's voice was big enough to have an impact on Goliath.
Yeah.
And we didn't have a way to plug in. And so if society had that mindset, which we did, policymakers, we made it pretty easy for a consolidated industry. They were here on one side of it. They'd get up there, they'd get their checks handed out to them, and that was that. And so what was lacking was political will. There was no political will because the lobbyists were controlling the will of the politicians. Yeah. There was no public pressure. And so what we are able to do is we educate people. By educating them, we get them to become advocates for the fishery, for the water, for Everglades restoration. That advocacy results in public pressure. The public pressure is what creates the political will, which results in better water policy. Yeah. So that's how we turn education on one hand into water policy in the other.
Yeah, exactly. That makes a ton of sense. And obviously it's a long game, but I think it's like the issues that you guys are fighting are just like some of the biggest issues facing the country, in a way. It's like, okay, like stopping greed and how do we actually have policymakers do the right thing, and getting people to understand it's not just how they can, what Goliath's tricks are, like the propaganda and the lies, like getting people savvy to that stuff. And you're seeing all that kind of stuff happen in all other places around, different discussions. Yeah. It's just one of those things that's a slow thing. But I mean, the stuff that you guys are seeing already is like really heartening. Like it's nice to see stuff happening, like you said, Aldo, like actual ground being broken.
Yeah, inspiring. Where, what, like you said, like what state, country, province, city, town, river, lake, ocean isn't facing some sort of problem.
Yeah.
Like literally every single one of them is. So, the work you do is also inspiring, right? It can, it inspires me. Yeah. We have our own issues here too, so it's like, it's cool.
That's one of the biggest, I think, reasons to be optimistic is outside of just Everglades restoration. Like we do, our mission is this massive fight, right, with a massive special interest on one side and what's right for the rest of humanity on the other side. That's the type of fight that I can see captains plugging into the future. It's things like Save Bristol Bay, where you have, massive mining company special interests, and then what's right for the rest of humanity on the other side. Those are the type. I don't ever seeing us being able to go in and get in the trenches in like, at a municipal level of like, oh, well, this community wants to dig this retention pond, and it's like that's not the world we live in. But what we have shown is that if the common person can get involved in something that's important to them and impact a fight that is these massive fights, that you don't necessarily have to hope that someone else will come in and fix the issue that is in your backyard. You can band together. You can be inspired by what's happened with captains or other organizations and take it on yourself and actually make a difference. It's kind of like the thought of like, if we put man on the moon, we can do these other things.
Right.
And so we have seen that, and we've seen that a great deal where other communities have initially maybe reached out saying, hey, there's this problem here. We want captains to take it on.
To help.
And after going like, look, like we may look big and mighty, but we're a pretty small organization. I mean, we have we're growing, but we have a annual budget of $2.5 million. That's tiny compared to almost every other, even regional nonprofits. And so it's like we don't have capacity to take and fight all these things, but we have the ability to show that you can do it. Like you can make that impact yourself. And we've seen a lot of people pick up that torch with their own issues, and that part's pretty inspiring to see people start fighting for the places they love. Yeah, no, it's awesome. It's amazing, and it's super cool to get the whole like rundown of it all and understand the history of it and where it's heading. Because it's cool, like to see it. Captains is we read about it everywhere. Like it's on social. People are talking about it. Like it's great. It's great to see that people are really coming together, and it's cool.
And it was cool, like nice experiencing it kind of firsthand with Benny, and also seeing what BTT's up to, and like there's a lot of really. I mean, South Florida is a really cool ecosystem, and it definitely deserves protection. So,
100%.
Can we talk about the tarpon?
Yeah,
they're amazing.
Like, I mean, we saw.
Hey, buddy,
fighting so hard. This guy right here.
Yeah, exactly.
I want him to be able to catch tarpon one day.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
We also need to get Mitch to land one. So, like that's
true.
That's
one day.
Yeah, we need to. We're definitely going back. No, it's funny. I'd listen to just bring up one more thing about Benny. I'd watched his Millhouse podcast episode. Right before we went down, because it just aired like a couple days before we were going down.
Yeah.
And that whole baseline thing, like to your point, like captains being like, "Well, don't tell people the fishing's bad or the water's bad." Anybody who had the day we had, if they got off the boat maybe the only way that you could get off of that boat and be like, it was a shitty day of fishing, is if you lived in the 70s and you were Lefty Cray or whatever in Homosassa. That was the only person that could have said that, because like we were surrounded by, the most big, beautiful tarpon ever, and, we were catching snook and redfish and stuff, and like if people think that fishery is ruined, that's crazy. To me, that's insane. But I am an outsider.
I think that's what you saw is why it's worth saving.
Yeah, because we were in Florida Bay. Yeah.
You saw that it's still there. It's what's magical about it, what's valuable about it. It's still worth saving. But when you see it collapse, and each time it comes back a little less and a little less, and a little less, that baseline of what is good is constantly trending downward. And when you have the amount of people moving to Florida every year that we do, if all it would take is a decade, and people's idea of what a good thriving fishery is nothing like what mine would be. And so it's important for us to get people to experience what you guys did, because you're gonna then see like, dude,
totally.
I've been there one time and I freaking love that place, and I'm gonna help those guys fight to save it.
That's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
We were like,
totally.
That's exactly what happened. We went there. We're like, holy shit!
How could we let
like,
this die? This is incredible.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And for fly anglers, like what that is saltwater fly fishing history is that place.
Yep.
There was just tarpon everywhere, and I still couldn't land one. Sorry, Benny, but rock and roll.
Man, you hooked three. You hooked three. They are tarpon. They're not small. They're not 2 pound smallies. Like.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, Mitch, I would say you're not the only person who has experienced that. That is also
right?
part of what keeps you wanting to come back for more, right?
Totally, 100%. Okay, well, we just got 5 more questions to kind of round the show out. It's 5 questions we ask every single guest, and they're just kind of more general fly fishing kind of questions.
I gotta get them to quiet down here.
Yeah, no worries. It's all good.
My kid decided it's time to do dishes.
No problem at all.
Tell him he's got 15 minutes. He's got 15 minutes, and then we're all good.
Okay, so 5 general fly fishing questions. The first question we're going to ask you right now is, what is your favorite fish and why? If you had to pick a favorite fish, what would it be?
Tarpon. Easy.
Nice.
Yeah,
I feel you. Yeah. What is it about tarpon that you love?
What's that?
What is it about tarpon that you love?
Oh,
Might be an
man.
obvious question, but
I mean, what's not to love? They're massive. They're powerful. They're can be finicky. You sight fish them. I mean, they offer the greatest attributes of all fishing rolled into one package. You can sight fish them. They eat on the surface. They're strong. They're big. They're fast. They jump. I mean, they have stamina. It's like
so cool
holy
looking
cow,
too.
man. It's like the ultimate package.
Yeah, I get it. It's a great answer.
Yep.
And I think the coolest thing about tarpon is the places they live. I mean, look, they live in the Everglades.
Yeah,
so cool. It's so wild. It's another reason why the Everglades are so cool. They got tarpon in there. It's like, geez, it's really, really wild. Okay, next question is, if you could fish anywhere in the world right now, free tickets to anywhere in the world, and it's going to be the best fishing ever, where would you go and why?
Ooh, gosh. That's a good one.
You can even go back in time if you want.
What?
Teleportation, time machine.
Okay, if I can go back in time, I'm fishing here 200 years ago. In the
yeah, definitely.
Fair enough.
If we're talking about today, I would probably I don't know, it's not necessarily most original. I would probably say maybe something like the Seychelles or something like that, simply because
why not?
I don't know that it's not something that like the normal everyday person may be able to afford to go do. It looks super fun, and it's halfway around the world. So but God, that list could be pretty long. There's so many places that I would love to go and experience, and Patagonia, and
that would be awesome.
You name it, could go on forever. There.
No, that's cool. Seychelles would be an adventure. There's no doubt. I mean, it's one of those places. 200 years ago, though, I like that. Right there. It's great.
Right here at home.
It's a good thing
years ago. That'd be the top
about.
choice.
But with like modern gear, though.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, no silk lines.
I don't know. Honestly, I think I could float around out there in a freaking rowboat and just take it all in and be perfectly happy.
That would be cool to fly on the wall 200 years ago.
Yeah, the boat would just be cruising across a bunch of tarpon. Yeah, that's great. Okay, number 3 is, what is one of your best or favorite fishing memories of all time? Best fishing memory.
Gosh, I got a lot of really phenomenal fishing memories.
I can imagine,
I remember one time, kind of a funny thing, when I was a kid. I was probably maybe like 10 years old, and my parents' best friends lived on Fort Myers Beach, so the next island south of us. And we would go out there almost every weekend, and we would go across the street from their house and go fishing. And my buddy and I, their son, were were probably been skimboarding or, or swimming or something. We weren't too hardcore fishermen back then. We were 10 years old. And our dads, on the other hand, like they would go fish. They would go walk the beach and fish. And we were at the house and our moms told us to go get our dads so they could make lunch for everybody. And so we go across the street and tell our dads, like, you got to go make lunch. Give us your fishing rods. They hadn't caught anything. They've been fishing all morning long, and give us your rods. And so literally, I don't think they had probably made it back to the house yet. And we would throw these silver spoons called reflecto spoons. And I don't think they'd probably made it across the street yet. And I cast out and I catch a massive snook. I mean, like probably 44 inches. Massive.
Oh my God.
And my buddy and I dragged this thing up on the beach and it's like as big as we are. And we're all excited. And so we go tromping across the beach with this snook and bring it back to the house. And I think that the look of disbelief on our father's faces, and also pure jealousy and disgust that they had been over there for 5 hours and hadn't caught anything, and these two little shits came walking back, dragging a massive snook behind them. That was a pretty funny memory from my childhood.
Yeah, your dad, just like, son of a just giant, holding the snook like, yo,
hey, Dad!
That's awesome. Man. This is easy,
like,
bro.
What the hell?
That's awesome. I love that. That's a huge snook. Jeez, I can't even imagine what that would be like, especially when it's the height of you. Okay, number 4 is, why do you fly fish? Why do you go out? What do you get out of it? Why do you do it?
It's therapeutic. It's challenging. But the biggest reason why I fly fish is it's like why I love tarpon. It's the places that you do it. And whether that's here in the Everglades or whether it's out west on a river in the middle of the mountains, it's like I get just as much joy catching a little brook trout because of the places that you catch them. It's just the most beautiful places on the planet that you can do that. And that's why I do it. It's just the places.
I love it. Yeah, no, for sure. I totally appreciate that. Okay, and the last question of the day here is, what fly pattern represents you best and why? If you were a fly, what would you be?
Probably a bonefish slider.
Nice. Okay.
That's a new one. You'd be surprised how many people say woolly bugger.
Really?
Maybe you wouldn't be surprised. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
don't know.
I'd say
Woolly
a
bugger.
bonefish slider. I think it's versatile. It's stealthy and very effective.
I like that. That's great. That's awesome. That's the first time we've heard that pattern, and I think just talking to you for an hour, I can see it. I can see that. Yeah, stealthy. Getting into those sugar events, incognito, getting to the press. I love it. It's great.
Good one.
That's awesome, man.
Good one.
Yeah, no, that story's so cool too. Like I
love
going
that.
back to that.
You're like, wait a minute, I've got press credentials.
Honestly, it's like a movie, man.
Yeah.
Like it's so cool. Like that you're able to do that. Bonefish slider. I dig it. That's cool.
That's great. That's a first.
It's a first.
Good deal.
And the last of the questions here on the show. But Chris, like, we appreciate it immensely coming on and chatting to us. It was really cool just to hear firsthand, about captains and all the stuff going on. And I mean, not that you need to hear it, but thanks for doing all the work you guys are doing. Like it is inspiring, even all the way up here in Toronto. And we're just so happy to see this kind of thing happening, because I think a lot of people feel the same way, So when we see other people see it happening, it's just, there's a lot of disparity out there. It's nice to have something nice,
I mean, there's no shortage of people from Ontario living part of the year in Florida.
Totally.
So, talk about everything being connected. I mean, even the average, homeowner or vacation homeowner in Toronto, this is something they should care about too, because
absolutely,
it's their water too,
Yeah, totally. I mean, and people are a good example of that. Wildlife, you look at waterfowl. I'm a duck hunter.
Yeah.
A lot of the birds that you guys depend on up there, rely on Florida and the Everglades for their winter grounds. So
yep,
it's definitely
Canadian
all
geese.
connected. Yeah, but
It's all connected.
I appreciate the opportunity, guys. It's for us that the key to making an impact is to bring new people and new blood into the fight. And anytime we can get access to a new audience and hopefully get them to at least be intrigued enough to look into us and visit the website and follow our social media, it's one more voice added to the megaphone.
Totally.
100%.
On that note, shameless plug time. Where can people find, like, what's your Instagram? What is your website? Where can people get involved? How can they donate?
We've got the typical Instagram, Facebook. I think we even have a TikTok.
Right on.
I'm not the social media guy, but we have a big presence there. Any of the social platforms, we have Twitter, YouTube, Vimeo, but the hub of all the resources would be our website, captainsforcleanwater.org. And there's a ton of information on there from different mediums of how you like to receive stuff, whether it's video or written content, infographics, articles. There's just a ton of information on there that you can learn and ways for you to plug in.
I will say the animated Our Fight page on your website is super
awesome.
Cool.
Appreciate that.
Really well done.
Takes you through like the history of the problem and where very easy to follow, very cool.
Nice.
Yeah, it's amazing like what you guys have been able to do. Like, tip of the hat.
Tip of the hat,
Thank you.
brother.
Appreciate that,
man.
guys.
Yeah,
of course. Yeah. Well, thanks again for coming on, and yeah, man, have a great rest of your day.
Will do. Thank you. You guys too, and keep in touch.
Yeah, thanks,
Chris. We will.
Thanks, guys.